We'll be putting together an art book of a lot of the assorted images I've done for prints and for other commercial clients that have never been seen in a collected form before. I want to make it easier for my collectors to get those images more than just on your computer, but in print, where you can kind of more casually come upon it. Although using your phone to look up images is casual, but to me it's not. I like everything to be on paper, and I like to have something all kind of collected and combined where you can get to it in a library. And so our intent is to get a full book together of a lot of those images which I've produced in the last 10 to 15 years that have really not been assembled before.
Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here. Really happy to welcome a great novelist and comic book writer that I've enjoyed reading for years, and excited to have a chance to have a conversation with him. Michael Jan Friedman, everybody. Nice to meet you, Mike. Welcome.
Great. Thanks. Great to be here.
Congratulations on your body of work. I'm a big fan of your novels and your comics, and look forward to talking to you certainly about your work at DC in particular and Star Trek. We'll get into those things. But I know you're in the midst of a Kickstarter campaign for a really fun genre fiction concept. And it's pretty cool. It's a detective story, but it has an interesting little backdrop as well. Why don't you tell us about it? I won't try to pronounce the titles of the detective or the backdrop.
Right. Well, it's called the Aslan Investigator for the Empire. The idea is that Cortez never conquered the Aztecs, and the empire grew and grew from the northern tip of North America to the southern tip of South America, and it became sort of an insular society. And he's a gumshoe in the Mickey Spillane tradition. Yeah, I know, it's crazy, right? I mean,
it's a great idea.
And he's an investigator for the Empire, and he tracks down murderers, basically. When I came up with this idea originally, I bounced it off an editor friend of mine, and she said, "Mike, I love this idea. I want to read this book. I can't buy this book because." Can you imagine giving this to our salespeople? They'd approach a bookstore buyer and say, "Yeah, it's a 21st century Aztec Empire noir murder mystery." The buyer would go crazy trying to figure out where to put it in the store. But fortunately, on the internet, we don't have that problem. So about 8 years ago, I came up with a couple of novellas because it was 2012, and it was the supposed end of the Mesoamerican calendar. And so I actually have a copy right here.
Hold on one second. I'm going to zoom in on you there. There we go.
Okay, this is the first book. It's Aslan, the Mashtla Kulua Mysteries, and it has a pronunciation key in there.
That's good.
Everybody's name is an Aztec name, and all the Aztec gods and so on. And this is a culture that kind of still believes in its gods to some extent, but it's a modern culture, and they have internet type communications and television, and but in the midst of this, there are all kinds of things going on, and one of them is that people get murdered occasionally, and that's when Mashla enters the picture. He's a former athlete, a former player in the Aztec ball court, and so he's a former athlete. After he blew his knee out, he followed in his father's footsteps and became a detective, basically. So yeah, so at one point, and we'll talk about this, I guess. At one point, I wanted to try and make this into a comic book series. And so toward that end, I enlisted the help of Sal Velluto. I had worked with Sal on a Justice League Task Force arc of 3 issues, and just it was wonderful because, well, here's some of Sal's concept art for Aslan. And Sal is an amazing artist. He's amazing. There are comics I would read just to see his art. And the idea of working with him, when Brian Augustyn, the editor of Task Force, told me that was a possibility, I was just thrilled. But since then, Sal and I have become good friends, and we actually worked together on a 2-issue Marvel remix retelling of the Fantastic Four. What was it? 59? No, it was 49 and 50. Where Doom gets the power cosmic.
Oh, sure.
So we retold that, and his Silver Surfer just blew me away. Sal is great. So he's going to be doing. We'll be offering his concept work as an award, and also he's going to be doing sketches for us in the book of the main character, Mashla Kalua, and who knows what else at this point. I should also say we have Mike Collins is going to be doing some work for us. Mike is a Brit, and he and I worked together on about, I want to say, 25 issues of Dark Stars, my creator-owned property for DC.
Yeah,
and did great dynamic work. And because it turns out he's also very good at likenesses, we're going to have him do sketches of backers, people who.
Oh, that's great.
The campaign at a certain level will be portrayed in scenes from the book as with their own likenesses. So Mike will be doing that for us, and he is also a spectacular professional.
That's great, man. No, I definitely want to talk about the Dark Stars and your comic book work. But no, I think this is a really intriguing idea for a detective series, and certainly the Aztecs. I mean, we do know what evidence is left of their advanced civilization and all of their accomplishments. So it's kind of great to speculate what they would be doing in the 21st century.
Yeah,
and I mean, I think it's a really great idea, really. And this is your second novel in the series, right?
Well, it's a second book. The first book encompassed 2 novellas.
Oh, great.
This book, I guess, will be a novel or something very much like a novel, but it'll be structured in a unusual way. But it's a book length story.
Okay, that's cool. Are you more comfortable in short story form than trying to do a full-fledged novel? How do you feel about that?
Well, when I first started writing, I've done everything differently from the way you're supposed to. When I first started writing, I couldn't write short stories. I could only write novels, and that's what I did for a long time. And then eventually, people kind of cajoled me into doing a short story here and there, and I enjoyed it. But usually in a Star Trek anthology, but still novels. Everything I started out with, even if I started out to try to write a short story, it wound up being a novel. But then recently, like in the last maybe 5 years, I just started writing almost all short stories. And in previous Kickstarters, I launched 3 different short story collections. So,
Okay.
but,
Well, and
but
also, if you back Mike's Kickstarter, you have the opportunity of getting other books that Mike has put out over the years, even some comics as well.
right.
And we'll talk about those. I'm glad I see that since there's just a week left of your campaign,
Mhm.
and you did just make your initial goal, but now it's time for the stretch goals. So we want to tell people if what might be coming and everything. Oh, there we go. Omar's a big fan as well.
Omar is a great guy. Omar is a great guy. He's a wonderful human being, and he's also a very good friend of one of my sons. So I'm very glad to see encouragement from Omar.
Absolutely. So that's cool. Yeah. No. So I don't know what other incentives are there, Kickstarter wise, as far as backing the project.
Well, you can get an ebook. You can get a physical book. You can get the first book in the series. You can get both of them. There's also a Mashla Kalua story, a kind of a first adventure story in one of my short story collections. So you can get that as well. Um, you can be written into the book
Wow.
in terms of, as a character. You can be written in terms of your likeness. I mean, there's all you can write the dedication.
Oh, that's hilarious. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So
Funny.
all kinds of ways. I mean, one of the things, listen, what's different about a Kickstarter is you can involve your readers in ways that you can't in traditional publishing. So why not give them those opportunities? You know, so we get, I have like 2 levels of being written in. One is, a one-time mention. You could be a person, a street, a company, and then there's like the full Tuckerization, which is, when you become a character in the book. And one of the things that's unusual about this book is I have a short story at the end of it, and the short story is going to launch my next book project,
Oh,
and it's a superhero story.
cool.
Yeah, so that's attracted a lot of interest as well.
Sure.
And yeah. I mean, so Kickstarters do certain things very, very well, and I try to really capitalize on those things and offer opportunities that you can't get elsewhere.
Now I know you're part of Crazy Eight,
Right?
and then celebrating your. There you go. Yeah, indeed, you've got. Is that a full blown Crazy Eight shirt? I
It
wasn't sure
is
if that was a badge or a button or whatever. There you go. Look at
crazy
that.
shirt. Um,
Excellent.
and yeah, and it is our 10th anniversary. We launched we launched 9 years ago with
Okay.
our first offerings, and we what we did is we resolved to be Crazy Eight in 2010, but in 2011 we went to a convention called Shore Leave that we attend every year. It's a great fan-run convention in the Baltimore area.
Okay.
They have a sister convention called Farpoint, which is also great. One's in the summer, one's in the winter.
Great.
At Shore Leave, what we did as a promotional stunt to get things rolling is we asked for a line, the first line of a story, and then I sat down in this little in this little space between 2 brick pillars, which was not good because I'm a little claustrophobic, and and I sat there with a word processor, no, with a computer, a laptop,
Okay.
and a screen that was attached to the laptop, and the screen faced out. And I wrote the first part of the story as people were walking by and watching me write it. And then after an hour, I got up and Peter David sat down. And then Peter David got up, and we kept leaving each other in really odd circumstances, so little cliffhangers. And I got up, and then Bob Greenberger sat down, and it went like that. We ended up with 10 hours of material, which amazingly enough hung together as a story.
That's awesome.
And it was about a place called the Crimson Keep. And subsequently, we kind of we published that story, and then we wrote stories on top of that, and then we did another shared kind of a mosaic novel, and we packaged that all together in a book about the Crimson Keep, which is one of our Crazy Eight publications. We've got, I would say, 60-ish books
Wow,
in inventory. Yeah, yeah.
man. Because yeah, like you said, then the authors you've already mentioned, plus Paul Kupperberg, I know is part of that as well.
Paul Kupperberg, Aaron Rosenberg, Russ Colchamiro, Mary Phan, Glenn Howman. We just recently brought on Jeff Thorne and Hildy Silverman. I hope to God I'm not leaving anybody out, because they'll kill me. But we've got some great writers, and also people in the group who are adept at design and the internet and internet commerce, and everybody's got some expertise beyond writing, except me, I think. And so yeah, it's a great group, and we're really we're actually picking up energy these days. So I look for even bigger things.
That's great, man. And honestly, that's a great group of writers, and aware of a lot of your works, all of you. And also, I like that fun of doing a shared story like that. It reminded me of when Harlan Ellison, I know, used to be in the storefronts and type out his stories and would post them up in the window and stuff.
Right.
Very cool.
That was one of the inspirations.
Sure. That's excellent, man. No, that's great. Well, like I said, there's a week left of this Kickstarter, and people should definitely check it out. And also, then they can experience, one of the tiers is, I want to say, the $55 tier. You can get 11 Crazy 8 books.
Yeah, 11 of my Crazy 8
of your books specifically. Yeah,
11 books that I've done for Crazy 8. You can get that in ebook form. You can get that in physical book form. Yeah. So that's certainly a possibility. Another one, actually, there's a limited number of them, but I have that Justice League Task Force 3-issue set that Sal drew, and
what was that story?
It was one. There are some things that I've done in comics and in books that I'm really proud of, and this is one of them. It was about a superpowered group of white supremacists.
Oh, jeez.
So very timely, and
yeah.
and it was John Jones and Gypsy, and a kind of a the thing about Justice League Task Force is it was a little bit like Mission Impossible in that you always had a little bit different group. Green Lantern, Hal Jordan was in it.
Okay.
And, it was very cool. I'm very proud of that. Looking back, I think a lot of the work that I've done that I'm proud of is with Brian Augustyn as an editor.
That's excellent.
Great editors: Bob Greenberger, Margaret Clark, Paul Kupperberg, in my Crazy 8 colleague, was my editor for a while.
Sure.
But did some really cool things for Brian, because he didn't know better.
I've had Brian on the show. It's I'm a fan of his as an editor and writer as well. Absolutely, man.
Yeah. They need great assignments.
That's excellent. And then I'm curious, because I used to read Legends of the DC Universe, and I see you had a 3-issue arc of that as well. What was your story? I'm sure I read it.
It was Flash, but focusing on Barry Allen.
Okay.
Barry. We knew he was a police scientist, but very seldom did we get to see that part of his life.
Yeah.
And so this was a 3-issue set wherein really Barry's the hero. Barry and his detective skills are really more the focus than his Flash identity.
And this was the period when he had died in Crisis 15 years earlier, because I want to say 99, early 2000s kind of period, or
Probably right. Right.
yeah. So that's cool. So yeah, it made it even more special than having a Barry Allen story,
Absolutely.
in
Absolutely.
the midst of the Wally era.
It was a rare opportunity to do that because I grew up with Barry Allen
Sure.
and Hal Jordan and those guys, um, and yeah, it was a great opportunity, and I guess I didn't screw it up too much.
You really had a chance to write a lot of the top tier DC heroes and stuff. I was looking at your Wikipedia, and man, New Titans and uh, Batman and Justice League Quarterly and um, other Flash stories. Man, you had several Flash stories right after Flash 100, 102, 103, 104, 105. You did Flash 1 million.
Yeah. Well, Mark Waid was kind enough to bring me in when he needed some relief, and although he could never quite relinquish the reins, it was like, here, Mike, do it. Please do it. I can't. I have so much on my. You know what? Actually, would you? Here's an idea. And couldn't quite relinquish it. But then why should he? He was the quintessential Flash writer. So you know. But we did some great things. We did Flash 102 through 105 right together, and that's kind of historic.
What was the conceit of the 1 million episode
Boy,
issue?
I wish I could tell you. I do remember one thing. I think the way it started out, we thought it would be really cool for Flash to be racing himself. We weren't sure that had ever been done. So we had him racing himself, and then we were like getting into the physics of it, and like, well, if he's racing himself, is he actually in some way going backwards? Is this the self who's winning? Is that the self he started with? And it became like a real brain twister. Try to figure that out. And Mark was relentless. He wouldn't let it go until it was perfect. So
Well, that idea of the Speed Force and how and really no, I know Mark spent a lot of time with that, and I remember there was even one story of Crisis where when he dies and becomes pure energy, he becomes the lightning bolt and goes back in time, and he is the lightning bolt that hits the chemicals and turns Barry into the Flash.
right,
So
right.
that's pretty cool.
Very,
Absolutely.
yeah, very cool.
No, definitely. Let me see. I got Mark McGrath. There we go.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Explain to me Farron Colas.
Well, the name, the name is a slight alteration of Ferris Colon. Because he was a hard ass. So iron butt or something like that. So Farron Colos. He was. This was a takeoff on the Green Lantern Corps. What happened is,
Dark Stars, yeah.
yeah, I came into DC one day on my birthday, and I was going to have lunch with Bob Greenberger and Brian Augusta. We were going to Mickey Mantle's restaurant. Mickey Mantle was one of my heroes, and he was alive at the time. In fact, he was at the restaurant when we were
wow.
there. But anyway, so I was going to have lunch, but I said, I'm going to be there, so I'm going to pitch a couple of stories, and I did, and I didn't really get the reaction I was hoping for from the guys I pitched to. So I was a little down when I went to lunch with Bob and Brian, and they said, well, if you were to invent a hero, like what would he be like? And I said, well, my two favorite DC heroes are Green Lantern and the Martian Manhunter. And they said, well, what do you like about them? And I was thinking, well, what if I put them together? What would that look like? And that's how I wound up with Darkstar. He's an alien. The whole idea of the Guardians saying, yeah, let's go to this planet that we consider very primitive and pick one of their people and trust them with one of our rings. It always seemed to me to be a little too trusting, right? So I was thinking what they would more likely do in a rational universe is they would send one of their own people who they trained, and he would be the hero or the protector, defender of that planet.
Hmm.
And so that was what happened with the Dark Stars. Baron Kolos was from a planet called Genuine, and Genuwyne, and he was the protector. Although he chose deputies because we did want to have some connection to humanity. So he chose subordinates, deputies from the human species. Um, and what was different about the Dark Stars is they were more down and dirty. They weren't kind of noble knights like the Green Lanterns, and they were overseen by the controllers, not the Guardians. So the controllers are kind of a related species, related to the Guardians, and there was a lot of conflict because here you had the controllers who were they were tight asses, right? And and, uh, and then you had the Dark Stars, particularly Farron Kolos, who was like, very expedient and not one to stand on ceremony. So you had this real tension between the controllers and the Dark Stars. Um, but they were a there but for fortune version of the Green Lanterns.
And it was a good run. It ran over 30 issues, right?
It ran 38 issues and the zero issue, so
That's awesome.
39 altogether. It was
Yeah.
a part of uh, um, the trilogy. What was I? Now I'm forgetting the name of it.
The event or
It was. I'm sorry.
the event or no?
It was a trilogy between the Dark Stars, Legion, and the Green Lanterns.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm a
So
big Legion guy.
yeah, it was so
Was
much.
it
It was
was
great.
it the original 20th century Legion or was it the Legion of superheroes?
It was the 20th century.
Sure. Oh, that's great. Yeah, with Vril Dox and everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, Mark has the answer for you. Trinity.
Trinity. That was it.
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, it was Trinity, and it was beautifully done and stuff like that. I have to tell you something. I had written a lot of Star Trek comics before I
Yeah.
started Dark Stars, and that kind of came naturally because I'd written so many Star Trek books and even an episode of Voyager.
Yeah.
So, but in comics, I have to say there were times when I felt like I was doing a great job, and then there were times when I felt like, looking back, like I could have done it. I tried, but I feel like I could have done a better job. And I think Trinity was one time when I was experimenting with telling stories without a lot of dialogue, and I don't think it really worked for me as well as it could have, particularly since I was working with some very talented people in the trilogy in the Trinity. I guess it was 2 issues, I think, in the event. So I would concede that was one time when I really wish I had taken a different tack and done a better job.
Who were some of the other artists that you worked with?
Well, it was Mark Waid was writing Legion.
Okay.
Gerard Jones was writing Green Lantern.
Oh, okay.
And Barry Kitson did some of the art, I remember. Travis Charest, who was working on Dark Stars at the time, did some of the art. It was just, it was a lot of talented people, and I learned a lot. I actually, learned a lot from my interaction with them. So that was great.
Didn't John Stewart, wasn't he a Dark Star for a while?
John Stewart, yeah. One of the best parts of Dark Stars is I got to pick up pick up characters in the DC universe. At one point, we got Jon Stewart. At another point, we got Donna Troy. So
Yes. Yeah.
right. So here I am, with not just writing Ferran Kolos, but writing Jon Stewart and Donna Troy. I was like, wow, this is great. And I really, it was really, I felt lucky. I felt lucky to be able to do that. And some of the things that I established in Dark Stars for John and for Donna wound up being picked up in later issues of other comics. Ron Mars is a good friend of mine, and
Cool.
Yeah, he picked up some of the stuff that I had established for John, and yeah, it was great. It was great to be. Listen, it's on one hand, it's kind of a pain in the ass to be at the mercy of everything else in the DC universe. You're constantly making adjustments, but at the same time, it's so heady to be
Sure.
the DCU, an integral part of the DCU. So that was, yeah, it was great.
That's awesome, man. No, you had a great run. And I do want to, you mentioned your Star Trek comics and your Star Trek novels. I remember the one original series Next Generation comic crossover, that Modala Imperative.
Yeah, right.
And which part did you write? The Next Gen part or the original series part?
I wrote the original series part, because Peter David was doing who's also a good friend, was doing he was writing the original series. I was writing Next Generation, and then for Modala we swapped.
Okay.
In retrospect, he got the better end of the deal because he was able to put Spock into the context of the Next Generation, which was, and McCoy, I believe, too. So
yeah, Admiral McCoy. Yes.
Yeah.
So we got to see them as old men being together and everything. Absolutely.
Right. And
that's
so,
funny.
By the way, Modala, my 4 issues of Modala are with the covers by Adam Hughes, which are just spectacular.
Fantastic.
That's also a reward in the Kickstarter.
Yep. I saw that, absolutely. And then also, I'm really curious, and I want to get into the novels in particular. And you really did write every iteration of Star Trek, from original series, Next Gen. You did Deep Space Nine novels. You did, like you said, your Voyager-ish episode as well. And did you do Enterprise?
I never did. And
okay.
I'll tell you honestly, because I know we're going to get into Star Trek, right? And I'll tell you honestly, I know a lot of people liked Enterprise. I loved the actors in Enterprise, and I loved the quality of the writing. I didn't like the series, and I'll tell you why I didn't like the series.
Please.
I was, at one point, John Ordover, who is the editor of the Pocket Books
yes.
program, asked me to do a series in the backs of all the books, because 2 books were coming out every month. And he said, write me a 12-issue back of the book serial. And I said, well, what I'd really like to do is Starfleet Year 1, right? And because the beginning of the Federation,
yeah.
the beginning of Starfleet, and he said, great, okay. And so I started writing those, and every month there'd be another chapter of the serial, and it was sort of based on the right stuff, in that I had 2 camps: the military guys and the scientists, and they were kind of competing for the command of the Daedalus.
Yes,
original Daedalus, right?
Yep.
That figured into 4 or 5 stories in original series and Next Gen before it was done. But so it was a story that I loved, and the idea was that I would then expand it a little bit, and we would make a book out of it, Starfleet Year 1, and then we would have 6 more books in the series, Starfleet Year 2 through 7, and I was so pumped to do this. So anyway, I've all but finished the serial, and I'm sitting at a bat mitzvah next to Rick Berman's sister,
Oh, wow.
who I had met on other occasions because my good friend worked for her husband in Manhattan.
Okay.
So and she was a lovely, lovely woman. And so I was sitting next to her at this event, and there were hints being dropped that there was going to be a new series, and I said to her, Judy, just throw me a bone here. What can you tell me about this new series? So she goes, well, it's around. She goes, think 200 years before Kirk. And I went, 200. Wait a second. I'm doing that. I'm doing that. I'm doing Starfleet Year One. What? That can't be the. She goes, that's it. So sure enough, I was already doing it, and then they came up with it. Now if it's a choice between appeasing me and appeasing the producers of Enterprise, you know who's going to win that battle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what I did is at one point they were going to put the kibosh on it altogether.
That's what I was wondering. Go on.
Yeah, it wasn't going to be a book. And then we kind of pushed back, and they allowed us to do the book because it was so far into development, but with a disclaimer that what happens in the book has nothing to do with Enterprise, and Starfleet Year 2 through 7 never happened. However, the book, I'm really proud of the book. I thought it came out really well. I thought it did a much, much better job than Enterprise in terms of integrating into the Star Trek universe and being faithful to what had been established previously. But so for those reasons, I was never really that big a fan of Enterprise.
I understand. Oh, Jason has a question. He wants to know what your favorite Star Trek convention moment or moments were. And I'm sure you went to a ton of Star Trek conventions over the years.
Yeah, sure. I think it's Star Trek moment. Wow. Let me see. I think. Oh, I know. Okay. So I was at a convention in Massachusetts, and it was at the time they were releasing Unification, the two-parter, and one of the guests of the convention was Mark Leonard.
Wow.
So here I am, and they were able to get the episode and air it at the convention at the same time it was being aired, or a day before, something like that. It was going to be aired on television. So I'm sitting, as it happened, next to Mark Leonard, watching him watch his performance as Sarek.
Yeah.
Right? His ultimate performance as Sarek.
Right.
And it was so heartrending to watch him watch himself in die, essentially.
Right. His last days. Absolutely.
Yeah. And he's in a terrible, for a Vulcan, he's in a terrible state. And he's on one hand, he's kind of hooking into his performance. But I could see there was more than that. So I asked him about it afterwards. And he said, well, I was just trying to see if I did a good job. I said, you did a very good job.
Oh, my God. Those moments for people watching or listening that don't know. Yeah, he's basically got like Vulcan senility or whatever. And, he doesn't have the control of his emotions, but has a moment of clarity and just this range of emotions that he has to play in these final scenes that we see him. And also the bond with Picard, the tragedy of not connecting with his son.
Right.
I mean, it really, for the 10 minutes or so of screen time when they spend with him, it's so great. It really is. And yeah, man, he was always just amazing. I always say that, and here, we'll talk about Discovery and the new Trek.
Oh, yeah.
But what bothers me about the portrayal of Sarek's character in Star Trek Discovery, James, and I don't blame the actor. All the actors are great. It's not their fault. It's what they're given. And Sarek seems bemused by Michael Burnham and like entertained in the first season. Like she kind of delights him in a Vulcan way. And
Yeah.
I always love that moment of Mark Leonard's in Star Trek. I think it's 4. Yeah, when you know, when Spock and Sarek are speaking, and he's like, "It's good to see you," and he's like, there was a time that I think I was against you joining Starfleet, and he said, "But now seeing you with these people, maybe I was wrong." And he says they're of good character, and Sarek just goes, or Spock says, "They're my friends,"
Mhm.
and it's great because then all of a sudden Sarek can't help himself, and he's still a Vulcan. It's like, yeah, sure, that human thing, yes, of
Mhm.
course,
Yeah, right.
and that's what was missing to me in in Discovery, and especially at that point in his life when he was younger and so much more rigid, and really, definitely there's a barrier between. I mean, he respected the humans, but he didn't. Yeah, he wouldn't pal around with them. And yeah, like I said, Burnham is just like I said, it's almost very fatherly, and it's like, all right, so Burnham gets that, but Spock doesn't. It's like that seems inconsistent from a character standpoint. That's my 2 cents.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not. It's an interesting way to look at it. I think one of the things that happens is I think you relate perhaps to your children differently in different ways. A boy and a girl, you might relate to them in different ways. You might, you know,
Nurture one and not the other.
yeah, maybe a girl you have certain expectations, and the boy you have others, and that would be, you know, that would be a bad idea these days. But if you're a Vulcan, who knows? You might actually um, look at it that way, and so maybe that was part of it. And then I think, I look through the show sometimes. I mean, sometimes I watch it and I really enjoy it, more and more, uh, as I've said elsewhere, more and more with each season. I think Discovery has just gotten better and better, and is really hitting on all cylinders right now.
Okay.
My
No, it's all good, man.
the But at the same time, while I'm watching it, I'm also watching through it, and I can watch through it, and I can imagine, and I don't know this for a fact, although I have a couple of friends on
Do
this,
you?
yeah, but and I should ask them, actually. I should ask this, but um, I feel like at some point early on, somebody said, "Hey, wouldn't it be cool if we did a Sophie's Choice episode with Spock and this sister of his that we're thinking about, right?" And I think that might have been the justification for her being in the series at all. There was an episode where they were talking about going to the academy, right? Wasn't it? Who was going to go to the academy, Spock or Burnham,
Right, right.
right? And Burnham, he sort of Sarek, I guess, betrayed Burnham, if I recall correctly, right? So
Yeah,
Spock,
it's first season, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
and I thought that was an amazing episode. I mean, I really looked deep into that episode, and I saw an amazing number of layers, and I could see somebody saying, "Hey, if imagine if Spock had a sister, and Sarek had to do like a Sophie's Choice between the two of them. Wow, that would be great. So maybe we should put a sister in the series." I could kind of see that being the genesis of her inclusion. I
That's
mean,
interesting.
I think you know every Star Trek series has starts off at its own pace, and especially the original series, it makes mistakes. It mischaracterizes based on what we know later on. It
Sure.
mischaracterizes characters, um, and I feel like it took a while for them to find their footing in Discovery.
Well, we were talking before we started the show, and I think with Burnham, it would have been fine to have her raised by Vulcans, but I think it was a missed opportunity keeping it in Sarek's family, and I think it would have been interesting to compare notes with another Vulcan raising a human and saying, "Sarek, you have a half human son. I've raised this human daughter," and because it also I'd like to see more Vulcans the way we got in Enterprise. Gary Chapman's or Gary Graham's character, and I think it would be, it's almost like Sarek's the only Vulcan that like seems to get humans, and it's like, come on, man, there's like a whole planet of these people, and it would have been interesting to have them kind of compare notes. So that, I mean, and again, that's just my thought on that. Um, and yeah, like I told you as we were off the air or before we started the show, I just think that what drives me nuts is Star Trek's always been an ensemble show, and even more so as they got into the Next Generation years and the subsequent sequel shows. That, okay, here's a Worf episode, here's a Riker episode, etc., a Crusher and Troy episode, and I really feel like most of the crew is getting such short shrift. I understood that they wanted, and they did say from the beginning that as opposed to having a captain, we would see, the show in the eyes of a first junior officer. But yeah, I just kind of still would like it to be more of an ensemble thing. And it just kind of frustrates me that Burnham is the problem and solution of all. And also just this, as I told you, just this blind adoration that she's the most Michael Burnham of them all. I mean, it's just this like kind of weird, like she really, and oh God, there are just times where literally like the dialogue is, Michael, it's all about you. And I'm just like, yeah, I know. It'd be nice to see something about. I mean, we're 2.5 seasons into the. We're in the middle of the third season, and we're just learning the bridge crew's names. And I know they focused on other characters, but it's like that action happens on the bridge, and it's like, all right, there's Dreadlock Lady, there's the guy with the eye, or the woman with the eyepiece, there's the Asian gentleman, there's the black gentleman. It's like, be great to hear these people's names for a change, but whatever.
Yeah. I mean, well, you're right. Part of that though is we've been trained to expect that, and I think had we not been trained to expect that, we might not be blinking.
Yes.
If we weren't expecting to know the whole crew.
Yes.
So that's part of it, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I wonder if they were trying to stay away. I'm just thinking this for the first time. I wonder if they were trying to stay away from the problems that you encounter with an ensemble cast and long-term contracts and things like that. I wonder.
Maybe.
But yeah, that's true. I mean, the things that I questioned about Discovery early on were one was the Klingons. Why? Why are the Klingons different? Why are they wearing so much makeup that you can't see their faces? Are they not actors? Why? It's hard enough when you're wearing, traditional Klingon makeup, we'll call it, right? And you got to sit there for a couple hours and put on your makeup, but at least you could see the face, the eyes, the mouth, right? But nothing moved in these Klingon likenesses, and I thought, why would they do that, especially since they'd already established the Klingons? Why reinvent them and give them the actors this liability?
Agreed. And also their costumes were restricting as well.
Yeah.
And the Klingons are so physical. I mean, that's what I'm saying, man. I mean, it's just like the different choices they made. I mean, and again, we're close enough in age. I've been watching Star Trek for over 50 years. And I mean, there's just a certain expectation of the formula.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and again, I appreciate, as you said, or as you implied, maybe if it wasn't Star Trek, I'd like it more as a sci-fi show.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But because there's just this expectation of Star Trek, and also their insistence on placing it where they did 10 years before Kirk and Spock, and that, it's canon. And it's like, well, if you declare canon and you take license with canon, then you get half the audience going, yes. I mean, you don't want to be comic book guy and say, well, in episode 4, ... But, again, we've been watching these for 50 years. I mean, they compete now with the reruns on television and streaming and everything. So
I thought that was also, it's a good point. I thought that was also an odd choice, putting it in the middle of, like putting it right before Kirk You
Yeah,
know,
Pike Sarah.
it was a, it was a bad, a bad. I'll say it. I thought it was a bad idea. What they're doing now, being out in the future, right? This is boldly going.
Agreed.
Not kind of boldly fitting in where we haven't quite talked about.
Absolutely. Well, there's no expectation.
Right.
And also even the Klingons becoming more xenophobic, you could almost see them even if they'd started in the first season and put it in the future and said, I know we've been playing nice with the humans, but we've lost our way. Kalis wouldn't have done this. And that kind of feeling. Yeah, I could see that. But yeah, it was weird. Oh, and we should mention, by the way, Tiny Lister passed away this week.
Yes, right. Yeah.
Who was the Klingon in the first episode of Enterprise.
Yeah.
So yeah, fun actor. So I had my encounters with him. I used to cover boxing, pro boxing, and I was in Vegas for the Oscar De La Hoya Fernando Vargas fight, and happened to see him. It was at Mandalay Bay, and saw him in the lobby. And I'm like, "Hey, Tiny Lister," and he's like, "How do you know who I am?" I'm like, "Well, you're a giant. You're kind of distinct looking." And I'm like, "Hey, good job on Enterprise. That was fantastic." So I was there as a member of the press covering the fight. And after the fight, I was running to the press conference, and he's like, "Are you going to the press conference?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Can you get me in?" I'm like, "Absolutely."
Wow.
So,
Tiny Lister into the press conference.
And he was very happy. And he's like, "Thanks, man." I'm like, "Oh, it's my pleasure, man. Thanks for entertaining me."
Funny.
So yeah, it was pretty cool.
Well, I did a book with Hulk Hogan.
No, I didn't know that. That's fantastic.
It's Hollywood Hulk Hogan. It's this big, beautiful black cover, and him with his feather boa and big letters, Hollywood Hulk Hogan. And if your eyesight's really, really good, you could see it says with Michael Jan Friedman.
So was it his autobiography or?
It was his autobiography. And it was around 2000, and it was fun. I mean, it was a lot of fun to hang out with him and so on. But we did talk briefly about Tiny Lister because he was the heel for a while. That was
the movie No Holds Barred.
Right, working counter to Hogan, both within the movie and in the ring.
That's right.
On the movie.
Yeah, I forget his character's name in the ring, but I know exactly what you're talking about. It started with a D.
Yeah, it was a few.
Debu or something, or
yeah, I can't remember.
I can't remember either. That's funny because he came to Chicago where I worked at the sports talk radio station, and we spent an afternoon with him when the book was out.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know that you had co-written the book.
Yeah, I did that book with him. I was given the assignment by Margaret Clark, who kind of got, what happened is there was an opportunity to get the WWE license at Pocketbooks for Simon and Schuster, and
Sure.
After they got the license, they said, "Oh, what a great opportunity!" They got the license, and then they turned around, they looked at their editors and say, "Anybody here know anything about wrestling?" And it turned out that Margaret knew a little bit more than anybody else.
Oh wow!
So she got the wrestling gig in addition to the Star Trek gig, and then
Wow.
looked around and turned and said, "Oh, who's not going to wilt, next to Hulk Hogan?" And she picked me. I don't know why, but I remember working out with him one time.
Wow.
Him and Bubba the Love Sponge.
Oh God, yes, the talk radio guy. Yes, indeed.
So the three of us working out. He had like a French. His house in Tampa was like a French chateau, and he and he had this solarium full of this beautiful green solarium full of exercise equipment, and so he and Bubba are working out and I'm like, I could try something. So Terry, right? Terry.
Yes, Hulk's real name, absolutely.
I want you to try one of these. So it's a rope attached to some weights. And the idea is that you without using your legs, you pull it toward you, and then you go like that. You pull it toward you, and then you go like that.
Okay.
And I did it once. I was able to do one rep, and not even a whole one, because by the time I was done, it kind of like, shot out of my hands. And they went, the writer guy.
Exactly. Yikes.
So
That's a man, Bubba and Elk, rather salacious relationship,
yes.
as we later learned. I can let people look that up for themselves.
Yeah. But I had, and Hogan was a generous guy, and kind of pretty good raconteur, but wrestling is a very, very political business.
Well, sure. From a corporate politics standpoint, I can appreciate that.
But I mean, even within the wrestlers, everybody's very, very conscious of who they're talking to and who might be watching. And just to give you an idea, so at one point I'm in Detroit in the Joe Louis Arena, and I'm waiting for Hogan to show up. He's talking to Vince McMahon, and I'm waiting for him to come to show up so we can tape a conversation. And I'm standing and watching the what's going on in the ring on someone's television. And one of the writers comes over to me and says, "You can't stand here." And I looked around. I thought maybe I was in the way of something. There was nothing around me. It's like, what do you mean? And they said that television you're watching, it belongs to that guy. You can't watch his television. I was maybe 30 feet from his television, right? You can't watch his yeah, that's his television. Okay. So it was very territorial, very political.
Crazy.
Yeah, there was a lot of tension, underlying tension there in that community.
Wow, that's amazing, man. No, we got to know Bobby Heenan really well because he was originally from Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And when when it was still the WWF, they would come to town in the 90s and in early 2000s. We would do promotions with them, and we met Goldberg and Jimmy Hart and Hacksaw Jim Duggan and all those guys. And, I was growing up in Chicago, and I'm sure you know these names as well from the 70s. We had Bobo Brazil and Jimmy Superfly Snuka and those guys. Those are the ones that when I was a little kid that I was watching. So, Haystacks Calhoun, absolutely, man.
Argentina Apollo.
Right? Gorilla Monsoon when he was fighting.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man. No, I'm assuming you grew up in New York, obviously.
I did. My grandfather was a wrestling fan.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. So he would watch, it was on a UHF channel.
Yes.
Television, and he would watch these things, and I would, just to kind of hang out with him, I would watch too. And so I got to know these who was Bruno Sammartino.
The living legend, of course.
Right.
And of course, did you see that great HBO Andre the Giant documentary?
I don't know. I must have. I don't.
It was great. And also Ric Flair. They did a great one on ESPN. Had a great one about Ric Flair too.
Mm-hmm.
So no, I understand. Regarding that and mentioning that you did Hulk's biography. Did you work on other licensed, novels like Star Trek? Were there other IPs that were from TV or film that you did books?
I did Marvel superheroes, couple of those.
Really? Which heroes did you do?
I did the X-Men, the 5 original X-Men, in a book called Shadows of the Past. For Byron Price was the guy who had.
Yes, I remember Byron Price. Absolutely.
And so I did that. I did a Fantastic Four novel, guest starring the Silver Surfer, also for Byron. And Keith DeCandido was the editor on those books.
Oh, funny! Another Star Trek writer as well.
Yes. And I did Justice League, the Justice League animated show. Generated some YA novels, young adult novels, and I did some of those.
We're
Predator.
leaving out your crossover with Next Generation and the X-Men.
Right.
Planet X. That was amazing, man.
That was a lot of fun. There was a brief window of opportunity because for a while, I guess this was the second time that Marvel had the Star Trek comic license. So there was a relationship there. And John Ordover, who was the head of the publishing program at Pocketbooks at the time, said, made the overture. Listen, we're working on stuff. You're working on Star Trek, and I'm working on Star Trek. Maybe we could do a crossover. And it turned out they were going to do a comic crossover, which was their second comic crossover. And so we figured we would piggyback off that. Our novel was called Planet X, of course. What else are you going to call it? And it had basically the X-Men who showed up in the X-Men '94, the original new X-Men.
Yep.
For the most part, and there was some great pairings. I mean, it was all about the pairings. It was all about Worf and Wolverine in the holodeck in a battle scene. It was about Nightcrawler and Geordi talking about the transporter, and there was one scene there that I really had a good time doing. So Terry Hatcher was in a Star Trek episode.
Yes.
She was a transporter operator named B.G. Robinson, and she had a thing for the outrageous Okona.
Yes.
Right. That was the name of the episode.
The guy who played the Rocketeer played Okona.
Right. So so it's established that she's a transporter operator.
Yeah.
And in one of the scenes in Planet X, Archangel is flying through the ship, and he's claustrophobic. It's like, can I get out of here? And B.G. Robinson, right? And let's remember, Terry Hatcher also played Lois.
Yes.
Right. So at one point, her character, the B.G. Robinson character, looks at Archangel and she goes, "I can't believe a man can fly."
Nice. Hilarious.
So,
and also Picard and Storm kind of had a little infatuation.
Had a little thing. And keep in mind, this was before, when I wrote this, it was before Patrick Stewart was cast as Professor X. And I had Picard in a holodeck scene looking at Professor X, and there's a great resemblance between them, And so here's this scene of basically Patrick Stewart talking to Patrick Stewart. And because it just seemed natural, it just seemed like if there was a Professor X, Patrick would be the guy. He looks the part. And then shortly after that, they announced, yeah, there's going to be a movie with Patrick as Professor X. So that was pretty cool.
That's awesome, man.
And then at the end, I had Q sitting there. I think on beach chaise lounges. Q is sitting there with the Watcher.
Oh, funny.
Right, in a kind of little coda.
Sure.
To the novel. So yeah, it was great. It was so much fun, and people either loved it or hated it because listen, they're two different universes. I don't blame them in a way. The biggest challenge was finding a level of verite where they could both operate and not look way out of their environment. And
consistency and merging those two worlds and have them represent their realities and not stray from. That's why really, like yourself and Peter David and Marv Wolfman and Max Collins, I think are among the really good writers that can jump into an established universe in as far as novelizations or original novels based on film or television, and really, excel and do great stories, man.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say so, and very nice of you to put me in that company.
Oh, 100%. Have you ever, when you go, I'm sure you've gone to your share of San Diego Comic Cons, I always love that panel that they kind of have for the writers of novels that are based on TV and film, and just they kind of like quietly like kind of acknowledge each other, and like I don't know if they gave out awards or whatever, but I just remember seeing everybody together like Max and Marv and the like.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, there are organizations, kind of writers organizations. Um, there's a media tie-in writers organization that gives out awards and so on. But the last time I was at San Diego, I was there representing a project for Will Smith.
Okay.
Peter had a professional relationship with with Will too, really, but Will and his brother-in-law, his wife's brother, and at one point they were developing After Earth, which came out, I guess, about 10 years ago, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And they needed somebody to write the Bible. So they said to Peter, "Yeah, we're gonna hook you up with a couple of science fiction writers. We don't know who yet." And Peter said, I come with a couple of science fiction writers, my friends Mike and Bob Greenberger. We all work together on books. We would be the perfect team. And Will kind of said, "Well, all right. I mean, if we'll trust you. I mean, if you think that's a good idea." And his brother-in-law kind of got behind it and kind of put himself on the line. And so we had to do him proud. So it was supposed to be like a 40-page document, talking about the technology and the legacies of the characters and so on. And it wound up being 250 pages. Talking about going back into prehistory and talking about generations and generations that are forebears for Will's character and his son's character. And they were so thrilled with it that they actually hired actors to take still shots to put them alongside the entries for each ancestor. So it wound up being quite a significant document. But we worked on that, and we also wrote the comic. There was a comic that went along with it, and a couple of books, a novelization, and also another book that Peter and Bob and I wrote. So we wound up on a panel at San Diego.
That's fantastic. That's great, man. Hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I'm gonna wrap up, and it's an excuse to have you back when you have something else to talk about. But here, I'm gonna share the screen for a second, and this is the copy of the first novel of. Hold on, there we go. There it is.
Right. All right.
But so you can get both this first book and the one that Mike is currently working on now. That's Investigator for the Empire. It's at Aslan. Say it.
Aslan.
Aslan. Thank you.
Yeah. If you, if you're looking for it, you can look for it under my name, Michael Jan Friedman. You'll find all my Kickstarters, and that'll be at the top. Or you can just look up Aslan, and that'll be the first Aslan book that you'll see. There have been other Kickstarters that have used the name for different kinds of projects.
Okay.
Yeah. And please, we have 7 days left, and we want to get in those Sal Voluto sketches. And those
absolutely.
Sure.
So Jason, thanks you for answering the questions. He wondered if you had ever been to Hawaii.
Yes.
Jason is a Hawaiian native.
Only Maui.
Oh, cool.
And my favorite part of the trip, I don't know. My wife was pregnant at the time with our first son, and I wanted to go to Hana in a Jeep, but we couldn't because you can't bounce around a pregnant woman in a Jeep in Hana. But what was my favorite? My favorite part of the trip, I think the volcano.
Wow.
Yeah, was beautiful. They have you may have heard of them. They have these plants called silver swords, which apparently these beautiful kind of whitish silverish plants, which only grow on the I was told on the slopes of that volcano.
Wow. Is that Diamond Head? Is that the probably not. Sorry, Jason. I'm sure I'm getting it wrong.
I honestly, I was it Kilauea? I don't know, something like that. I forget, but it was a beautiful volcano with a beautiful caldera and these little silver sword plants that were really amazing.
He says yes. The road to Hano is very bad.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Oh, here you go.
Haleakala. Yes.
That's the volcano.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. There you go. Very cool, Mike. Honestly, pleasure talking to you. Pleasure meeting you. And we've left enough on the table for even more Star Trek discussion next time. You can tell us next time about the experience of writing an episode of Voyager and some of the other great novels that you've done over the years. And yeah, it'll be a pleasure talking to you again. So stay in touch. And yeah, whenever you got something new, happy to help promote. And like I told you off the air, I gotta touch base with Bob Greenberger and get him back about his latest project. So
right. Well, thanks for having me. I mean, it was great to be here, and thanks for the help with the project.
My pleasure, man. Michael Jan Friedman, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Mike. Great stuff coming next week on Word Balloon Live, both video and audio. We had a big week this week talking to Mike and Jimmy Palmiotti and some of the others, and it's going to be a lot of fun next week. Do you know about the Toys That Made Us and the holiday movies that made us and those shows? Brian Volk-Weiss will be joining me. Now, I'm going to pre-record that conversation, but be looking for that next week and a whole lot more. As always, thanks for watching.